Canada's premiers are gathering in Saskatoon, starting later today, for their first face-to-face meeting with the Prime Minister since the election. On the agenda, trade, tariffs, and building up Canada's economic resilience. The Prime Minister has asked the premiers for a list of projects he calls nation-building. I spoke with the Premier of the Northwest Territories just before he made his way to the meeting about what he hopes Ottawa will prioritize. Premier Simpson, appreciate making the time for us.
Oh, my pleasure.
You are going to be at the First Minister's meeting in Saskatchewan. What are you hoping will come out of that meeting in terms of a goal for the Northwest Territories?
Well, there's been a lot of talk coming out of the federal government about nation-building infrastructure and moving projects forward. And in the Northwest Territories, we have not had the same type of investment in infrastructure that the rest of Canada has seen. So what I'm really hoping for is some commitments from the federal government to move some of these projects forward. We have some major nation-building infrastructure projects we'd like to advance, and we really need that federal partnership to make it a reality.
Well, I know one of the things, because you also hosted the Western Premiers in Yellowknife, one of the things talked about there was a trade corridor connecting the Port of Prince Rupert to Canada's north. What would that look like, and what kind of difference would that make?
Well, yeah, one of the projects that we are pursuing, and Nunavut is involved as well, because it crosses both borders, is a road up through what we call the Slave Geological Province, a very resource-rich part of the territory that would go into Nunavut and then connect to a deep-sea port at Grays Bay. So that's a project that's been talked about for generations, for decades, hasn't advanced yet. So that's one that I'm really excited about.
Have you had that conversation directly with the Prime Minister? It does sound like the kind of thing that he's interested in, developing other sort of corridors, particularly in the north.
Yeah, well, that was in their platform. That was in the Liberal platform, right. that corridor. So, I know that in southern Canada, they are looking for a corridor from, the northwest coast of British Columbia to the Hudson's Bay. And we're also looking to join that by extending that corridor up through the Northwest Territories and Nunavut to the Northwest Passage.
What difference would that make? Give me a sense of what that would mean for opportunities, economic growth in your region.
Well, on our side of the border, the area that this road would go through is one of the most resource-rich areas really in the world. That's where we have 3 current diamond mines operating. We've had a 4th diamond mine as well. There's all sorts of critical minerals there. And so it would allow access to that region, which right now it's served by a winter road that we have to build every single year, and it's only open about 2 months out of the year. Having an all-season road in there would allow exploration, would make it economically feasible for companies to go in there and find resources, and it would allow us to run clean hydropower up there as well. So one of the other big projects that we have is a hydro expansion project. And so, I think the opportunities, not just for the territory, but for Canada, are enormous, because there's enough resources there to really impact Canada's GDP and to create jobs that we won't be able to fill here in the territory. We're going to need people from Canada to come up here and fill those jobs.
One of the things when the Prime Minister was discussing this with my colleague David Cochrane last week, he seems interested in the projects. It wasn't really clear to me how much funding would be behind them from the federal government, or whether he was looking for sort of private capital and investment. What kind of dollar figures are you talking about for some of these things? And I would imagine you would need the help of the federal government to make it happen.
Yeah, our land mass here is huge, but there's 45,000 people in the Northwest Territories. And we don't have the industries like places like Alberta have, or their tax base to generate the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to put towards these projects. So we really need federal partnership and partnership with Indigenous governments as well. All of these projects are on Indigenous land, and so we work very closely with Indigenous governments. But the financial piece will definitely need some significant contributions from Canada. And when you take them all together, we're looking at billions of dollars. Construction in the north is expensive, and I don't think that the federal government perhaps realizes that. We are, the terrain up here is very unique in Canada. It's very difficult to build in, and so it takes significant investment. But I'm confident there's going to be a return on that investment for years to come.
part of this project, and I don't know if you've received the memo that we've all been reporting on, perhaps you have, but it appears that they want these big projects, this one project, one review, done in sort of a time frame of ideally 2 years, but 2 to 5 years. And the government says it can still respect the duty to consult with Indigenous communities. You mentioned that a lot of your ideas here are running through Indigenous land, First Nations land. Do you have concerns that that duty to consult can happen properly within that kind of tight timeline?
So in the Northwest Territories, we are our land and resources is managed under a different regime than the rest of Canada. It's actually managed under a federal act, the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, and that act is, it implements treaty commitments. And so the timelines that are being talked about, they might not necessarily work in the territory because we actually have different legislation. But that being said, that legislation ensures that we are meeting, our treaty commitments and Section 35 consultation requirements. So I'm not concerned about that up here. In the territory, that's what we work with Indigenous people. We're an Indigenous territory, so my concerns aren't there.
Okay. What are you hoping? I guess my question is, do you feel like there is renewed interest in the North from this government, this new federal government? And how are you hoping to leverage that at this first in-person meeting with the Prime Minister?
Yeah, there's interest in the North from the federal government and from governments around the world. I don't think I've ever seen this much attention on the North and the Arctic. And the Prime Minister has made Arctic sovereignty, Arctic security, a cornerstone of his campaign, and it's been talked about extensively. So I'm very hopeful that those comments, those political commitments are going to come to fruition, because it's given what's going on in the world right now, Canada needs to assert its sovereignty, and the best way to do that is to have thriving communities in the North and infrastructure in the North.
And do people in the North feel that threat to sovereignty in a different way? I was up in Nunavut with the Prime Minister before the election, and it was quite stark, not only the terrain, obviously, but the way people were feeling in that particular moment.
Well, I don't think that people in the Northwest Territories are afraid that the Russians are going to invade, over but there's definitely a sense that we're lagging behind the rest of the world. If you look at all of the Arctic countries, you look at a map of circumpolar world, there's a lot of infrastructure throughout that world until you come to Canada. The North, it really has not been invested in the way that it should have been, and the way that other countries have invested in their Arctic regions.
Okay, well, we'll see if that changes, Premier. Nice of you to make the time. We'll speak again, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Take care.
As we mentioned, premiers are gathering in Saskatchewan, and it's happening, of course, as Manitoba and Saskatchewan are facing these intense wildfires, dealing with the evacuations of whole communities. Thousands of people in Manitoba and Saskatchewan are being evacuated as both provinces are still under a state of emergency. This was the scene in the Pas, Manitoba, as residents from Puckatawagan First Nation arrived on military transport. More than 17,000 people are being evacuated in that province. And in Saskatchewan, 17 wildfires are currently burning. More than 8,000 people have been forced from their homes. And Premier Scott Moe says resources are stretched thin. And Premier Moe joins me right now from Saskatoon. Good morning to you, Premier. How are you?
Hey, good morning to you and your viewers as well.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you making the time. You've got a lot going on there right now. Let's start with the wildfires, Premier. What is the situation right now, and what's the biggest challenge the province is facing?
Well, we need a rain, and in the midst of not having that, the largest challenge we have is keeping our communities, our homes, and our families safe. That's happening on many levels, and with partnerships with other provinces, states, the federal government. But I'd say equally importantly, and most importantly, is just local firefighters and volunteers that are doing everything they can to keep their communities safe. So, thanks to them.
Yeah, I know you said yesterday that resources are stretched very thin. You've got 220 provincial firefighters on the ground. At what point is it too thin for you, Premier, and do you need more people?
We are bringing in more people. We have 200 provincial folks on the ground, 400 provincially employed community firefighters, municipal forces, contractors, all in addition to that. Well, there's literally thousands of people battling and protecting communities. But we are bringing in significant resources from other provinces in the way of tanker support and in the way of boots, firemen on the ground as well. And so we're appreciative to a number of other provinces, 3 states, and the federal government for their support.
Would you expect that we would see more communities evacuated in the coming days? What are you hearing from the way that the fires are developing?
Yeah, if we don't see a rain in the future here in the next number of days, I do expect that we will unfortunately see additional evacuations as we have a wind that's changing direction, threatening different communities every few days. And so we do ultimately, in order for this to slow down, need a significant change in the weather. And in the meantime, everyone's doing their level best to keep their homes safe.
How about where you're putting people? I know that's been a challenge in Manitoba as well. Many hotels in Saskatoon are full. Where are you putting people that are having to be removed from their communities?
Yeah, thus far, we don't have quite as many people evacuated as Manitoba does to date, and not as many as we did a decade ago. However, in saying that, there's more every day. We evacuated Sturgeon Landing yesterday, and likely we'll be looking at another community or two, maybe even today. I hope not, but likely. So we still do have room in hotels across the province, but those are filling as we go through the days without a change in weather. And so it's going to have to be all supports and all hands on deck, working closely with communities, the Red Cross, as well as our provincial resources to find people a place to stay somewhere in the province and hopefully and ultimately get them back to their home as soon as we're able as well.
I'll get to the First Minister's meeting in a minute, but just one last question about when and at what point you would need the military and you would get the federal government directly involved here.
Well, again, it depends on the supports that each entity can offer and what we might need at the time. We saw Manitoba had requested airlift supports for a community that had either been cut off or didn't have road access. We've not had that happen as of yet this particular time. It's not to say that we wouldn't, but that road access is so imperative for things like an evacuation or getting supplies in. So the federal government has a certain degree of supports, not air tanker support. If they did have air tanker support, we would request that. That's coming from other provinces and states. But the federal government, in saying that, is have been very supportive, and we're working together with the federal government, other provinces and states in utilizing the supports that they have available, and thankful for the national and international agreements that we have. I think it's an example going into the First Minister's meeting of how we are able to have these agreements support one another in different years. Gone by, Saskatchewan has supported other provinces. We're gathering that support this time. It's that same attitude, I think, is incumbent on us to bring to the First Minister's meeting this week of working together. Okay, well, let's talk about that. I mean, it's significant that everyone's coming to you, even during this time. What are you hoping is going to come out of the meeting? Because clearly the Prime Minister has these nation-building projects on his mind. He wants to get things moving quickly. What is your hope? My hope would be that we start to discussions on what a regulatory process would look like moving forward that would provide certainty for the investment into industries that are creating value and provide us as Canadians with that opportunity to become the strongest economy in the G7 and to become a global energy superpower. And so in the meantime, if we have to prioritize projects, that is what it is. But that in itself is an admission that the current regulatory process needs changes. And I think that's the broader goal that I would have coming out of this tomorrow and over the next number of months is let's alter that regulatory process so it's competitive, provides certainty, and provides success for Canadians. I'm sure you've seen the memo that we've all been reporting on that sort of lays out some of the things that might be in this legislation. So it is not the repealing of Bill C-69, which I know you have also called for, but it does seem to be a streamlining of regulations, as you say, and sort of getting rid of conditions that might hold things up. From what you have heard so far, does that seem to be moving in the direction you want, even if it's not the precise things that you asked for? Certainly. We do need to do our level best to get, projects that are creating jobs and opportunity and enhancing the Canadian economy by enhancing the subnational economies across the nation. However, a piece of legislation that is circumventing the regulatory process that we have is nothing more than a stopgap. And so I think what it does is it buys us time as provincial leaders and as a federal government and a prime minister to really have the discussions about what our regulatory environment looks forward so that we don't have to legislate around it.
Right. You sent 10 changes to the Prime Minister you're hoping that Ottawa will make. I don't think in those changes, though, things really important things, I should say, like negotiating with China to get rid of tariffs on canola and other things. But I don't think you had a national project in there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Does Saskatchewan have one that you've put on the table or you're willing to put on the table?
There's a number of projects that we have. We likely have 10 to 15 projects, right, I think, that have the ability to really enhance the Saskatchewan and the Canadian economy. First among them would be the port-to-port corridor, opening up Asian and European markets that Western premiers discuss. I think that really is a national project and could tie into things like the Energy West campaign that we see Premier Houston looking at. So. Yeah. At the end of the day, what I would say our focus is yes, let's prioritize some projects. Let's get them across the line. But let's also not lose sight of the fact that we need to build a regulatory process that works for everyone and works for Canadians so that we can attain those aspirations that Prime Minister Carney has put forward with respect to being the strongest economy in the G7 and a global energy superpower.
I know that, there's been obviously this talk of Western, Alberta separatism, but I know there's lots of concerns in Saskatchewan too about feeling that Ottawa's not paying enough attention to the things that you're talking about there. Do you feel like there's an opportunity for course correction? How will you know that it's happened, Premier?
Yeah, certainly. That's why we had, penned a letter with 10 suggestions with respect to how we could start to reset that relationship and reset that regulatory process that is going to provide opportunities for Saskatchewan communities and industries to succeed and, thereby contribute even more greatly to Canadian economic success and opportunities. And so I do truly believe there is a path forward, notwithstanding the feeling of alienation that many people in my province and other areas of Canada have felt due to some unconsulted policies that have had an impact on, our economy and opportunity and jobs over the last decade or so. So, onward and upward. And this is the opportunity, I think, that lies at Prime Minister Carney's feet. And thus far, I think we've been, cautiously optimistic with the direction that he's put forward.
Premier Moe, I'll just end again on the fires if I can. Just a message to people in your province that are being evacuated or worried, if you had some advice or thoughts for them today.
I would say thank you to all of those on the front lines. There's an example after example of individuals that are going above and beyond, not only in protecting their own home, their own home community, their own home and their own family, but protecting that of their neighbors and providing support in any way they can. And so thank you. And there will be better days ahead as we find our way through a very challenging few days ahead of us.
Okay, Premier, we're all thinking of you and Manitoba. Really challenging times for both of you. Appreciate you making the time, though, on this super busy day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
In the face of foreign threats, a core priority of this government is to build projects of national significance, projects that reinforce our country's resilience, projects that connect Canada.
There will be dozens of other projects that we might not even know about because investors will not come forward as long as they risk having to face the worst approval system in the world.
While the Prime Minister pitches a national building plan, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre pushes him to move faster. What will it actually take? How much will this shape the conversation amongst First Ministers when they meet in Saskatoon later today? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Sherelle Evelyn, the managing editor of the Hill Times, Aaron Wary, senior writer for CBC News, and Tonda McCharles, the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star, all in Ottawa. Tonda, let me start with you. You heard from Premier Moe. I think he has big expectations and some goodwill, too, that the Prime Minister is moving in the direction he and others want. What do you think is the likelihood something comes out of this meeting that is significant?
Well, the Prime Minister has already flagged in that interview earlier this week with CBC that he intends to come out with a list of projects. He wants to show his work, I guess, and give proof to the idea that there are projects that are worthy of fast-tracking approvals for, and to perhaps illustrate just how it would work is to identify those projects. But I still think very much the devil is in the details of all of these things. And yes, there's lots of goodwill, but I hate to say it, but I'm old enough to remember, these promises go back a very, very, very long time from, 1985, the ripping up of a sidewalk in Quebec over bricks that were made in Nepean versus bricks that were made in Quebec, right up to, just last year, people forget that the Trudeau government also promised to fast track a whole bunch of, reduce a bunch of barriers to internal trade. And, progress on these things is very, very slow. So let's see what projects they designate, and let's see how they actually do propose to reduce the regulations and red tape around their approvals.
And I thought one of Scott Moe's points was important, Erin. If you're going to make it easier to get things done and you're going to keep things like C-69 in place, maybe that's not, maybe you're contradicting yourself a bit there. So I agree with Tonda, the legislation that comes out of this is going to be pretty important here.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see exactly which projects get put on the table as the sort of national priorities, or this phrase of national nation building projects that Mark Carney wants to pursue. And then I think there is a larger question about sort of the long-term structural legislation around project approvals. But I really, this really does come back to how it works in practice. If you look at some of the demands that are coming out of Alberta, for instance, they want pipelines built, but essentially without any kind of emissions reductions policies or climate policies from the federal government. And that's a pretty maximalist demand. And I don't know how Mark Carney can meet it. It may actually leave him some room to seem more reasonable in so far as he could come out and say, yes, we will have pipelines, but there will have to be emissions policy on these things.
Right.
I think, so much of this long conversation about building things, if you go back to the start of the Trudeau government, it came in too saying it was going to get things built, but the way to get things built was to build out the regulatory system in a way that people would have faith in it. And now we're having a conversation about it being, too onerous, the regulatory system. And so I think, a lot of this is going to come down to exactly what this looks like in practice in terms of actual specific projects. It's fine to say there should be more pipelines, we should build things faster. But what does that actually look like in practice? And what are the compromises? And what are the other, things in terms of, for instance, environmental policy that are tacked onto that? I think that's what we may start to finally see tomorrow.
Sherelle?
Yeah, I know some people see red tape and some people see very important regulations to mitigate environmental and health impacts. So finding those ways to walk that line, as the other said, to that balance is going to be really, really key, because yes, there could be a way to reduce duplication while also keeping the necessary checks and balances that are needed for any sort of development. I do think, though, when we get all the first ministers together, what we do end up seeing is, or what we want, or at least what I watch for, is, okay, but what is that actually going to mean when they have to go, when all these premiers have to go back home? Are they looking for the quote unquote good of the nation for these nation building projects? Or are they looking for what is going to get them some support from their own communities and their own political bases and all those things? Because the politics will always creep in and will always have a role to play. So regardless of how much everybody wants to come together and say, yes, we want to move forward on this, at the end of the day, is your project more beneficial to the nation than the others? Is your project more beneficial to your own people than others? That's going to still have to come into play.
It's also not clear to me, Tonda, how much the federal government wants to spend when it comes to these two. The Prime Minister talks a lot about private capital as opposed to the federal government just handing over money. So, it's one thing to make it easier for private capital to come and invest. It's another thing to make sure these kinds of projects go ahead.
Right, and I think that, again, therein lies some of the detail. I mean, some of these things, like one of the big pet projects that the Quebec Premier has put on the table is he wants federal money for hydroelectric project development further down the Churchill River in Labrador that he signed on to with Newfoundland, a deal earlier this year. And he wants federal money to kick in there, and he's arguing that it's a nation-building project, it's clean energy, it facilitates the growth of a clean energy corridor, and he wants billions and billions of dollars from the federal government to kick in. And Mark Carney's made it pretty clear that his idea is to both cut red tape, reduce the trade barriers, and get private investment leveraged to buy back into these kinds of things and get them going. So it's not clear to me exactly how much money Mr. Carney's prepared to put on the table for any individual project, but I think he is a strong believer in the idea that, if you build the framework for it, it will come, right?
Yeah,
not that if he's not in the business of building the field of dreams or the pipeline of dreams. I don't think, but he is in the business of getting other people to dream big and making it possible. But he's going to run into, isn't he, a lot of perhaps opposition. We're already hearing some of it from Indigenous groups and environmental groups and advocacy groups because they don't want shortcuts to be taken on their concerns.
30 seconds, Aaron, on whether just building the framework for that field of dreams is enough for a federal government.
Yeah, we're in a kind of weird position where, maybe not weird, but a situation where the federal government is essentially being blamed for the fact that things don't get built. And I think maybe one of the smart things Mark Carney could do this week or tomorrow is to remove that excuse from the situation. I think, though, that would still leave questions to be answered by provinces and by private investors of exactly how these things are going to get built and under what conditions. I think it has become too easy to say, if we just removed, federal regulation, 1,000 pipelines and projects would bloom.
20 seconds, Cheryl.
Yeah, it's not just political will. It's systemic overhaul. You can't just say we're going to do it and say we're going to allow things to happen and that's going to work. That's not how it works. And if people don't follow the necessary steps, you're going to run into legal challenges, and those are going to hold up things way more than any sort of slow rolling through a bureaucracy. Okay, be an interesting First Minister's meeting. Thank you all for being here on this Sunday. Cheryl Evelyn, Aaron Wary, Tana McCharles. Thanks, everybody.